Well, hello and welcome to In the Growth Space. My name is David McGlennon. I'm your host. And this podcast is really all about growth. We talk about growing yourself in personal development and personal growth. We talk about growing your team and helping your team to grow and develop, and then also growing your business. And so today's episode is really in that last category. It's really about growing your business. And actually, technically, it's about scaling your business. And we're going to get into that and the difference in between growing a business and scaling a business in today's episode. And often scaling a business is looked at through the lens of hustle and grind and really losing the sight of things that really matter to us in life. But today's guest is not like that. And before I tell you about him, I'm going to tell you about the book that he just wrote. And it's called Ready, Set, Scale: Scaling Your Business Without Losing Your Soul. And I love the book. We'll talk about it. Here's a copy of it. But scaling your business without losing your soul, it's such a great perspective. And there are so many great and practical tips in the book. And we talk a little bit about the book, but we also talk about some other elements of being an entrepreneur, being a CEO, what it means to have a confidant, have a coach to be able to share things with, process things with. Stephen Adelé is our guest today, and Stephen really shares a lot of great wisdom, and he's had a lot of experience being in that CEO chair, and he's had a lot of experience running and growing and scaling businesses. It's a great conversation, and no matter where you are on your life and leadership journey, I guarantee you're going to learn something from this episode. I guarantee you're going to learn something from Stephen because he drops a whole lot of wisdom in this conversation. So Stephen Adelé lives in Denver, Colorado, and he is the president of Ready for Scaling, as well as an adjunct professor at the University of Denver, Daniels College of Business. And he teaches graduate and undergraduate courses on scaling new ventures and business strategy. Stephen is a serial entrepreneur. He's built several successful companies through self-funding, public markets, and private equity. He's a 3-time finalist recipient of EY's prestigious Entrepreneur of the Year Award, 2006, 2007, and 2021. He's had 3 consecutive Inc. 500 awards for America's fastest growing private companies from 2019, 2020, and 2021. Not easy years to get that in. He's been voted Best Boss in America. He's been a finalist in that. He's a favorite guest lecturer to entrepreneurial conferences and business students. And over the past 25 years, Stephen has built, scaled, and sold 4 different companies, including his latest venture called QuickBox Fulfillment, which, as the CEO, he led the growth from inception to over $100 million in 5 years. It's fantastic. He actually talks about that particular company and the mission that they had at the beginning of our conversation. So I can't wait for you to hear that. You're going to really enjoy this conversation with Stephen. And so let's go ahead and get into that conversation right now. Well, hey, Stephen, thank you so much for being here. Man, it's really an honor to have you on the podcast. Welcome.
Oh, David, thank you. Super excited to be here. Big fan of what you do and the work that you do with entrepreneurs and business leaders and us crazy folks out there just trying to change the world.
Yes, 100%. Well, I got to tell you, we were talking before we hit record, and I got to tell you, I have been following you since I think it was one of your, well, I know it wasn't your first entrepreneurial endeavor, but the supplement company, Isatori, was where
Yes.
I, first kind of ran across your path when you were CEO there. And I was a customer. I'm one of those those crazy people that like to work out, and so you had some great supplements, and so getting to have you here is a real treat. So I'm really honored to have you here.
Oh, that's exciting. Yeah, that was a great journey, and certainly very much a part of the recent book I just wrote and some of the stories in there that you've probably come across.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's go ahead and start there. So I know that you're a serial entrepreneur, and you've had several opportunities to not just grow companies but scale companies. And you've written a book, and I love not only the title, but I love the subtitle: Ready, Set, Scale: Scaling Your Business Without Losing Your Soul. And it's the subtitle that I really love. That's the part I think that's super hard. And I gotta ask you, like, how did you come to that subtitle? Because I'd really love to know the story of that.
And you're absolutely right, David. It's an understated subtitle because, as you and I were just talking prior to going on here, it's the hardest part.
Yeah.
There's certainly fundamental principles that we put in place to scale companies, but keeping this intact, keeping your soul intact, keeping your mind intact, keeping your sanity, your wits, keeping the essence of why you did this entrepreneurial venture in the first place, preserving all that is so vitally important through the process and journey of scaling a business. And so, just to take you back a bit, I've started, built, scaled, and sold 4 different companies over time, and after the last venture, I thought I was going to retire, and I found that retirement is far overrated. One, because I
Yes.
don't play golf, and certainly don't profess to be good at it. Secondly, there's only so many house projects you can do. So
Right.
before you and I really wanted to keep my mind engaged. So
Yeah.
I went back to school, and I earned my master's. I'd always wanted to earn a master's degree. I went to the University of Denver, and then through that process, it seemed very interesting to want to teach. And for some reason, it's one of those things, again, that I always had in my back of my head, that one day I would like to teach. I'd like to carry on, what I've learned, pass that on to the next generation of leaders. So I started teaching strategy to the undergrads, and then scaling business ventures to the graduates. Lots of fun. And in the process of doing that, and in one of the classes, one of the directors at the School of Business there, Daniel School of Business, we were in a boardroom one day, and I was just kind of jotting some notes on a whiteboard. I'm one of those, persons who never met a whiteboard they couldn't fill up.
I love it.
And so, I was writing some things on there, explaining strategy to a friend of mine, and he said, "You need to write a book about this. You need to write a book. You have all these principles. You put them into practice. They're battle tested. They're time tested. They're universal truths. Like, you've crystallized them. You teach them now. You need to put this in a book. And I think you should call it Scaling Your Business Without Losing Your Soul." And it was just like, loved the title. That was his title originally, proposing. And but the idea of writing a book wasn't something that I felt really passionate about at the time.
Sure.
But then, left that meeting, and it just kept stirring in me and stirring in me. And I thought, let me see if I can just first start by putting an outline together. And I have a very unique way of writing, and I've done a lot of writing over time. And as part of my story, you may have come across our magazines we used to have and publish. And so done a lot of writing. And the way I write is I do an outline first, and then within the outline, I start asking myself questions inside the outline. And then in order to write, I go back in and I answer those questions. And that's the first very large part of how I formulate, the structure. And then I started to really, take hold of the idea that, a book is something. And, and then I do what I've always done my entire life, which is I put it out in the universe. I start talking about it. I start telling people about it. I posted about it. And then two things magically happen, right? The universe starts moving you in that direction, starts bringing things to you. And also, you start having to live up to the accountability of, well, I said I was going to do
Exactly.
this, so I should do this.
I love that.
And as you know, writing is especially publishing a book, it's very much kind of a hockey stick curve of, you get through, and I would write every day, and I found it to just be so enjoyable and a bit cathartic. And I just loved reliving a lot of the stories that made the principles relevant, both the good and the bad. So not, as you know, success is not linear. It's just, massive ups and downs and, near defeats and near bankruptcies and all that good stuff that goes along with it. But through that process, just found that, really started to engage in the writing. And then towards the end, just really getting everything right, taking a lot of things out of it so that it was really focused on just what it needed to be centered around. And in that process, we decided to move what was originally the title into a subtitle. It felt a bit too long for a title.
Sure.
We love the, ready, set, scale, in the sense of like when you're getting ready to, start something. And that's what we're doing, is we're preparing companies to scale, sometimes in the midst of scaling, so they don't implode. And then moved it to a subtitle, and then changed. He had scaling your company, and we just changed it to business, just little semantics on the wordplay. But you're absolutely right. It just becomes the core of the idea of scaling in terms of preservation of your soul, and that can mean a lot of things to different people.
Sure.
And hopefully we'll get into that. But yeah, it was a lot of fun, the writing experience, and very, very important and understated part of scaling is the ability to preserve one's soul through that process.
Well, and that gets me curious, and I'll get more into the book here in just a second. But what were some of the practices, or what are some of the practices that you have that do help you in times of rapid growth? And I know in the book you make a distinction between growth and scaling, because they are two different things. But when you're scaling a business, what are some of those practices that you employ?
Yeah, it's a great question, and we do talk about many of those, and the ones that I found that were most helpful for me, because there's business related and then there's personal related, and the two are very intertwined. As an entrepreneur, I always despise the expression, it's not personal. Well, as an entrepreneur, it is personal. It's everything. You're weaved in through every fiber of that business. Right. So, for me, it was typically looking at on the business side and saying, okay, I have these values. Am I living by these values? Am I acting by these values? Because if you're out of integrity with those values, not only are people seeing it and feeling it, but you're feeling it internally. It's tugging at you in these different directions. And when you feel inconsistent, that's when that struggle to, again, preserve one's soul starts to come through. The other part on the business side is finding a mission, some sense of a core purpose. Why are we doing this? What reason do we have to exist beyond just generating a profit? Capitalism is great, but you can do well and do good. It's not binary. And so, and that's not always found immediately. You don't always start a company with this giant mission. Some do, some have a mission, at the center and the genesis, but ours and our last company for QuickBox evolved over time, where we learned that, our biggest problem we had was employee turnover. And we learned that our greatest committed employees were the ones that we had given a second chance, only we just didn't realize it. And so through a practice I have called walking the four corners, walking around and just leaning in, talking to people, getting to know them, not micromanaging or telling them what to do or how to do their job, but getting to hear their stories and who they are as people. And we found that it was those most commonly overlooked in the workforce, those, the recently, incarcerated, the recent homeless, the disabled veterans, the women's battered shelters, recent immigrants. And by hiring them, in return, that reciprocity was they gave us hard work and loyalty. And so we completely flipped what was once, almost 100% turnover in 6 months to over 70% retention in six
Wow.
months. And so, but
Wow.
what we found at the core of that was it started to envelop this mission. And so it
Mm,
percolated that, hey, we're giving all these people second chances. We're building the community in a very direct and meaningful way. And then it became this mission where I was just speaking to her this morning. She was our marketing person, Jessica. She said, look, why don't we put this on our website? Why don't we put like,
yeah.
hey, we're doing this. You're coming to us with as a client. We were at third party logistics center. If we have a new client, you're going to bring us more orders per day. If we have more orders per day, we get to hire more second chance employees. And so she put a counter on the website. She put a counter up in the admin offices so we could see, how many more
Oh,
people we get to
cool.
hire. And
Yeah.
then, when I would talk to clients after they would join us, I would say, hey, why did you come to us, and ask them how the boarding process was? And they would inevitably say, it was table stakes with price and, service. But, your mission, we wanted to be a part of that.
That's great.
We wanted to feed into that. And we really love what you're doing. So it was a differentiator at times. And then it became this huge overriding mission for our company. And, it became a tagline. It was fulfillment
Mm,
on a mission. And so that feeds your soul, right? So,
yeah.
walking a potential client around the warehouse and having, and this actually happened, having someone turn the corner, come around the racking, put his hand out and say, hey, my name is Steve, and I was living in Civic Center Park 6 months ago, and now I have a job, and I'm saving up for a car, and just thank you. And like,
Wow.
oh, like, I mean, you
Gosh.
talk about
Yeah.
like just
Yeah.
the heart and the personal fulfillment and the
Yeah.
gratification you get from that. But that's the kind of stuff that would feed my soul. And I still remain friends with so many of them, still
Mm,
texting them, seeing how they're doing.
love that.
So just having that mission inside the
Yeah.
company to really
Yeah.
feed your soul.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the personal side, just a couple of things. One is, um, finding your anchor, right? Whether it's your family or whether it's doing Pilates, or for me, it's going to the gym. Like the gym is my sanctuary. It's like,
Yeah.
that's where I like refill my cup of
Yes. Yes.
my sanity. And,
Yeah. 100%.
it's always been that way for me, and very much enjoyed and have enjoyed that. And then, I think something that is oftentimes, especially as an entrepreneur who feels like they have to roll up their sleeves and do everything themselves, it's lonely at the top. It's
Yeah.
lonely in that arena where unless you join some peer groups or something, but having a coach, like I had a CEO coach that
Yeah.
was just magical to work with. Like he
Mm,
just grounded me.
mm,
He used to call it, I'm not going to let you breathe your own exhaust. Like, he just was, he,
yeah.
but he was also very good at centering me around, why are you doing this?
Mm-hmm.
Why are you doing this? Who are you being, right? About me as the person.
Mm-hmm.
And again, and that would, I think, very much help me preserve in many ways my soul. So those are a few fundamental ways, on the business side and personal side that I've found, to keep yourself walking in a semi-straight line.
Yeah, man, Stephen, I love the focus on mission, and it's because what you're describing is not a mission that just goes up on the wall, and it's some some verbiage that nobody really cares about or can remember, but it's a
Yeah.
mission that really drives you. And I think that's what missions are. They need to be, is something that drives you forward, and then, as you said, feeds your soul. Because
Yeah.
I think that's truly what a mission can do, and I love your focus on that.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right, David. And you can find them organically. You don't have to like get in a boardroom and
Yeah,
just what's our mission, right? It can come
yeah,
organically,
sure,
find something that interests you, find something, at church this past weekend, the pastor talked about leadership, and he said, look, leadership
yeah,
typically starts, at least oftentimes in the altruistic way, with answering the question, what breaks your heart?
yes,
And if something breaks your heart, how do you solve it? And if you
hmm
solve that, you're feeding your soul.
yeah. Oh my gosh, that's so good. That's so good. Yeah. I could go 100 different places with that because I love
I'm
that. I
sure.
love
I'm
that.
sure.
You said
Well, this
something
is
just,
your arena. So yeah,
yeah.
you know it all
Oh
too well.
yeah. Yeah, for sure. Well, you said something that I wanted to just ask you about because so oftentimes, so you talked about when you're a CEO, it's often lonely. And I think even as an entrepreneur, it's lonely because you're continually thinking about the business. Well, I'll speak for myself.
Mm,
I
yeah.
continually think about the business, and I've been involved in a number of different businesses, and I think that the entrepreneur mindset is constantly thinking about it, constantly thinking about the people, the metrics. How am I going to grow? How am I going to do this or that? And I guess how important then was it to you to have that confidant, to have that coach that you could just kind of process things with? How important was that for you?
Well, I'd have to say on a scale of 1 to 10, a 10,
Mm,
in
yeah,
terms of important. Yeah, you're right. As an entrepreneur, when you're running, building, scaling a business, whatever that looks like, you don't get the privilege of turning it off.
yeah,
You
right.
know, when you leave, it stays on your shoulders. When you leave the office, when you go to bed, it's probably mulling through your mind and keeping you awake. When
Hmm.
you wake up, it's there. When you're at the dinner table with your spouse, it's there.
Yeah,
It doesn't, you don't get the privilege of turning it off. Now you can turn the volume down sometimes,
sure.
hence
Yeah,
going on vacation or something, but you just don't get to turn it off. And so your mind is sort of playing this trick on you that it's always have to, you're replaying things, you're trying to solve things in your head,
hmm,
but you just don't get the privilege of turning it off. And so, you know, that's where I found, that the two sides, like we were talking about the the personal side, like having that anchor, like that's like
yeah,
when I would go to the gym, and when I go to the gym, I'm all in on the gym. I'm not on my
yeah,
phone texting and like reading articles or like
yeah. Me either.
I'm
Yeah,
working out. I'm
yeah,
100% committed to that, but I'm also spending time, feeding myself and my soul and my energy. And then on the business side, having a coach, again, that engagement, phone off. We're going to talk about some things that we need to talk about. You know, it becomes really, really important because you just need one. It's okay. You do need some recognition at times. And
sure.
typically as a CEO, you don't get that. You're the one giving all the recognition, and you need
Hmm.
someone to say, good job,
Yeah,
great
sure.
work.
Hmm.
That was fantastic the way you handled that.
Yeah,
And at the same time, you need someone to be very honest and real with you,
yeah.
to tell you, there is a better way to handle that. That conversation probably didn't go well. What could we have done better?
Mm,
Um, how to think through things, and and there's also wisdom there too.
sure.
He was the ex, president of Kinko's, and so he managed, I think, 3,000 employees or something. So there was a lot of wisdom there, um, and that was excellent to have. But also just feeling you have that confidence, and I will say later, um, in my last company, my 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 CEO coach turned from coach to just really good friend. So we would just
Mm,
go have coffee and have a beer and
yeah,
talk about business and life and things, kind of transitioning more a bit into life stuff. I felt like I had graduated for the most part, but
sure.
my confidant then turned into my wife, my spouse. So it was, we could have really deep conversations. Now that can be a little bit dangerous because then you're
Sure.
bringing more of it into the home.
Yeah.
But she was great with, and she brings a side to me that I typically didn't have. A lot more patience, a lot more empathy,
Mm,
and I think approaching things with empathy and having that sort of lens on just really helped me think through things differently. I'm a little
yeah.
bit short tempered and I can get very defensive, and she would just help bring that down in a very real way and help me
Spouses are
think
good
through.
for
And
that, aren't
so,
they?
yeah, I mean, yes, it
Not
just
that
has
I'm
been
speaking from
fantastic.
experience.
Yeah. And she's just my absolute best friend. So, I
Yeah.
mean, we do talk through everything. But yes, I think the coaching is just, it's not just the wisdom and the experience. It's just having something to really talk to in a very real,
Yeah.
open way.
Hmm.
And it's different than therapy.
Right.
It's different than, even your spouse. They're coming at it from a very different, unique angle, but
Hmm.
they're doing so because they want the best out of you and from you, and
Hmm.
they want you to win. Know that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting, and one of the things I know about our audience is we've got a lot of emerging leaders, and I guess I just want to segue and talk to them for just a second, because one of the things you'll notice that Stephen said is that there's two things. Number one, there's a lot of focus, and when he's in the gym, he focuses and he's all in on his body. When he's with his coach, he's all in with his coach, and it's focused and it's focused time. And I think that um, as emerging leaders, we can often get distracted because we think we have to be all things to all people all the time. And so I guess I just wanted to bring that out to the emerging leaders who are listening, and quite frankly, the senior leaders who are listening too, because I
Yeah.
think that focus is the commodity of that I think it's overlooked and underrated in the
Yeah.
world that we live
I
in.
I couldn't agree more, and I see it all the time. I mean, it is the strongest currency we have is focus.
Yeah.
And it's also something you can control,
Yeah.
despite what you may think.
Right.
So, there's in looking back to my younger days, I can certainly see where I allowed myself to just get far too distracted. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not just shiny bright object thing that comes up a lot, and that
Sure.
happens. Or you get the what you believe is the Midas touch. Everything you do because you had one success will be successful. That kind of. But I'm talking like day to day,
Yeah.
because now we're just bombarded by just everything wants our attention.
Right.
And when you look at the power of focus, and I read it was a couple months back when it first came out, but Elon's biography or autobiography, I don't know what it was, Elon Musk,
Yeah. Yeah.
love or hate the guy. Take that aside for a second. One thing you have to admire him for when you read through this book is when he set his attention on solving something, a problem. It
Mm-hmm.
was an obsessive,
Mm.
myopic focus,
Yeah.
and nothing else was going to get in the way. And you're talking about solving some big problems. I mean, like,
Right.
we have one more chance at getting a rocket into space, otherwise, SpaceX is dead. They did it on the third attempt, right? If we don't scale production of the Model 3, Tesla's dead. They were
Yeah.
3 months from bankruptcy, and he slept in the production facility, walked around the floor, and solved on the spot every single problem with all his engineers.
Mm.
Because now, yes, maybe his back was against the wall, but I think the point is when you see him do this over and over again, there's a pattern, and
Yeah.
there's a reason why he's successful. He takes focus to the extreme. And then you look at people like Steve Jobs, where when he came back into Apple and he said, "We're not doing all this stuff. Part of focus is saying no to all these things that are just a distraction." And so,
Mm.
but I too, David, find that true to be something that emerging entrepreneurs struggle with. I still struggle with that at times where it's, I have
Sure.
this little note that always says, do the most difficult things first. It's like,
Yeah.
get up, I'm a believer in making something first and then tackling the most, troubling and difficult things, whether it's a phone call or something you have to do or some work you're working on. But staying focused is key, and in a company, keeping your team focused, like keeping
Yeah.
everyone aligned. And that's
So
why,
true.
you came across this in the book. We start with business strategy, and
Right.
it's a complex subject. It's not glamorous. People don't tend to pay much attention to it, mostly
Mm.
because we don't understand it, right? But it's really, really simple. It's just, how are you going to compete and win? If you don't know that, what are
Mm-hmm.
you doing? You're just
Yeah.
sailing, ocean through the ship with your
Yeah.
sails and whichever way the wind blows. No, you need to know. But more importantly, when you design a strategy, and it's better to have a strategy that could be wrong than no strategy,
Mm,
because you can always change it,
yep.
is that should serve as your rally cry, right? It should
Mm,
serve as something that everyone is focused on. Um, it should be clear, it should be compelling, should be memorable, right? And
mm-hmm.
that's the things we talk about in the book. And how to actually get to that point. Because then, when you have this rally cry and people are working on things and they say to themselves, well, is it aligning with the strategy? Is it serving the strategy? The answer is no. Why are we working on it? Right.
Right.
Same thing for a leader. Why am I bringing up this new idea if it doesn't serve our strategy?
Yeah.
And so, yes, I think staying focused is incredibly easier said than done.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
it's I'm mentoring some entrepreneurs at the University of Denver. I have one female founder company, and she's just got a tiger by the tail. It's just incredible to see what's happening. Like, she's in the middle of scaling, and she
Cool.
didn't even know it was going to happen.
Wow.
It wasn't like it was part of the plan. And
Yeah.
but our last meeting, she's like, I can do this, and now I can do that, and I'm going to go do that. And it's like, focus,
Yeah.
right? Let's
Yeah.
focus. Um,
Mm-hmm.
let's focus. And
I love
so,
that.
how to get her to focus, again, coming back to the strategy and what serves the strategy, and how do we make sure that we're not letting these other things become a distraction, and sometimes it's all about priority as well, between
Yeah.
looking at, well, maybe it is important, or maybe it's just urgent,
Mm-hmm.
but what's its actual impact? Is it going to move the needle, and how difficult is it? How much resources does it take to actually pursue it? And we have this little scorecard that we will have them map ideas out on. And when they all land in the wrong quadrant, it helps them see it themselves
See
that,
it.
oh, okay,
Yeah.
maybe it's not that important or urgent, right?
Yeah.
It is just a distraction.
I love that. I love that. Well, you alluded to the first of your five core principles, which of course is strategy. And then, you've got structure, people, process, and cash. And I want to have you talk about those. But before you do that, talk a little bit about the difference between just growth and scaling, because I
Sure.
think that for an entrepreneur, I think it's easy to think that they're the same, and they really aren't. So share
Yeah.
a little bit about that. And I know
Yeah.
you go into that in your book, but I'd love for the
Yeah.
listeners
In a
to hear
very
that.
simple way, and it's a great question, the distinction, because in a very simple way, growth is usually moderate. Think of revenue growth,
Incremental.
annual, right? So year over year, very predictable, maybe 5, 10, 15%. A lot of what you see public companies do, right?
Right.
Just as long as they're getting that 5, 10% each year, no matter how they get
Yeah.
it, through acquisitions or organically, that's growth. And
Mm-hmm.
normally in those instances, your operating expenditures, or your OpEx, is usually commensurate with that growth. So just sort of, so you keep generating the same level of profit, because you keep your expenses commensurate with that particular growth. So
Okay.
that's would typically be classified as growth. Whereas scaling is, you prepare the company for scale. So, and that's what the framework is about, the
Mm-hmm.
principles. And that playbook has always been the same: that strategy, structure, people, process, cash. And that sequence does matter.
Mm.
And you then are able to grow revenues at an exponential rate, disproportionate to the growth of your operating expenditures. So you might
Mm.
see your operating expenditures increase to some level and then level out, whereas your revenue continues to expand. And in that instance, you're becoming, and should be, more profitable.
Yeah.
Um, and that rate of scale, can be anything from, I'd say 50% to, in the early stages, it can be thousands percent. It's
Yeah.
relative to where you're starting from.
Sure.
Um, at my prior company, QuickBox, we went from inception to 100 million in under 5 years, and so
It's
that growth
crazy.
landed us on the Inc. 500 3 years in a row, which
Yeah.
becomes, as you know, increasingly difficult because it's
Yeah.
measured on a percentage basis of growth. So it's harder to keep more than doubling your revenues each year. It's
Each
very
year.
difficult.
Yeah. Right.
Uh,
Yeah.
but that would be the difference between growth and scaling.
Yeah, I think that's an important distinction, and I think that um, it's good for people to understand what it really means, because if they're going into a business and they think they want that, but are not willing to do some of the things that you're talking about here in this structure and the five core principles. I mean, they've got a rude awakening, I think, ahead of them, right? I mean,
Yeah, and you can find out in the worst way, right?
right.
So
Yeah.
you can say, I want to scale. You can
Mm-hmm.
start scaling and then find out that you haven't done the work to build the right foundational, structure
Mm-hmm.
that's capable of scaling. So you can
Yeah.
scale to a certain point,
Right.
and then all of a sudden you start to see things. I call it building a Jenga, right? It's like
Yeah.
you take one piece out, and all of a sudden the whole thing can fall, but you don't know. It could be the second piece, could be the
Right.
third piece, but at some point the whole things will likely crumble.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to make sure that you've built that structure, you've done the work. And again, a lot of that work is just it's not the glamour stuff that you post about on social media, it's the work that's done behind the scenes, but it's the foundational work that does separate the companies that are able to scale from those who don't successfully make it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'd love for you to talk for just a moment about the five core principles. You talked about strategy. Talk a little bit about structure, and then we're going to get to my favorite, people. We talked about that a little ahead of time, but structure, people, process, and cash. Maybe take us
Sure.
through the five core principles real quickly.
Yeah. And let me first set the stage with saying there is one prerequisite to scaling,
Okay.
and that is finding product market fit. So
Mm,
table stakes, especially in consumer goods, is that you have a good product, right?
product.
And
Yeah.
when I say product, that can be used interchangeably with product or service, but you have a good product. It has to deliver.
Mm,
If it doesn't, people find out too quickly in
sure.
today's age, and you're done
Yeah.
before it even starts. So you have to have a
Yeah.
good product. You have to find the right market. And so
Mm,
we do talk about um, that in the book from a prerequisite standpoint. There
yeah.
is a chapter devoted about what does that mean to actually have product market fit? How do you measure it? How do you potentially find it?
Mm-hmm.
Because there is a lot of work that needs to be done there. Because you don't want to scale until you found that, because you just don't know what you're scaling towards, and you just won't have a proven or predictable customer acquisition strategy in place. So having that is the prerequisite. And then it's moving into strategy, structure, people, process, and cash. And the sequence matters. A lot of entrepreneurs, especially in today, and what we just went through with where VCs were throwing a ton of money all around the place at any idea, reminding me
Yeah.
back of the early .coms, is money doesn't necessarily solve your problems, and it also
Mm,
doesn't guarantee success. And so, in fact, I talk about it in the book. There's a really great study that was done on thousands of startups and the factors that contributed to success.
yeah.
And actually, cash was the least important, because
Mm,
if you're successful, trust me, money will follow. People will want
yeah.
to invest in you. You can go get money. You can get a bank much easier. But if you're just trying to go out there and raise money, that's just a different game.
Yeah.
And that does not guarantee success. And I've seen that over and over again. But cash is important. You do have to understand how much cash is required to support your ability to scale.
Mm,
And if that goes beyond your working capital, well, then you might need to go get some capital.
mm,
Or what I like to do, we talked about in the book, is how to create a negative cash conversion cycle, like how to actually use your internal operating capital to fund your growth, which is what we did at our last company. We had a very nice negative, and we had upwards of 4 to 5 million extra dollars, of available cash
mm.
without having to go for outside fund to fund the growth of our scaling venture. So we talk
Oh,
about how to do that in the book and fund the growth.
yeah.
But cash aside, when you develop that strategy, which creates the rally cry, if you will, everything
Mm,
else serves and supports the strategy. And you see, as you go through the book, it
mm-hmm.
continually serves up into the strategy. And then when you talk about structure, we the first thing we tend to do as entrepreneurs, because I did this when I was young and starting my companies, was we conflate structure with an org chart. We just think, okay,
Oh, yeah.
If I start to grow, I pull this org chart out and I'm the CEO,
Hmm.
I'm the big wig, and then I have all these people underneath me and I'm going to fill these boxes. So I need to go
Yeah.
hire a CFO, and then I need to hire a COO, and then I need to, and then I need to hire, a CMO or
Yeah.
whatever order that's in. No, when you're starting your company, there's a couple stages, but the first stage is typically, especially if it's a solopreneurs, who's my first hire? And we talk about it in the book, like, what
Hmm.
does that mean? Because that's probably your single most important hire you're going to make is the first one.
Yeah.
And so it's not filling a box on an org chart. It's looking at your business and understanding. And I like to look in the startup phase of that, of front end and back end. So,
Hmm.
how do I lead to a transaction? What do I do after a transaction? So you
Yeah.
need somebody that enjoys commercial facing and somebody that enjoys, backward facing in terms of the operation. So finding that complementary strength is the key in the beginning for a business to succeed. Not someone who's just like you. That's the
Hmm.
worst thing you can do, probably.
Yeah,
At
for
least in
sure.
my experience of what I've seen. And so finding that complementary strength, and then as you build your leadership team, again, it's not as you get to the next stage, which is usually around 10 million in revenues. It's not looking at an org chart and filling in the boxes. It's saying, looking at your business and saying, okay, what is my strategy? How do I deliver value? What
Mm.
are the key driving functions of my business? Let's find a leader who's
Yeah.
accountable for each one of those. Could be me in the beginning, or I maybe need to hire for it, the skills and
Hmm.
the capabilities. And so you're looking at your business in terms of how it functions. So when you think of structure, think of function,
Hmm.
and then
Yeah.
location, then authority, right? So
Love that.
then as you grow into a typical organization, when you get probably 25 million, then you're building out more of a typical leadership org chart and you're starting to fill up some of the other boxes. But again, you still want to stay very focused on what's driving value and how are those functions continuing to deliver value with a very specific leader,
Hmm.
and then build your teams around those. And so I think that's where we tend to conflate the wrong ideas. And then when you move into um, I know we're going to talk about people and then processes, but it's your structure that really brings your strategy alive, if you will.
Mm, yeah. Well, and I think so. So when we think about hiring and looking at, I think that's a really important distinction. Not looking at an org chart, but looking at function to be able to see who is that complementary strength. And then one of the things that I've noticed and I think you even say this in the book. If it wasn't you, it was somebody else that I was reading recently. Um, but sometimes the people who get you to a certain level aren't the people that will
Mm.
take you to the next level. Let's say it's 0 to 10 million or 0 to 25 million are one set of people, and then the next leap to say 50 million or 100 million may take a different skill set. So
Yeah.
maybe talk a little bit about that because I think that leads into
Yeah,
people.
great point, David. I'm glad you actually brought that up because that is a very interesting conundrum, and it can happen in one of two ways. One is in the very beginning, uh, when we're hiring people, we tend to over title them in the beginning of an enterprise. So
Sure.
when you're young and you're under 10 million and you bring in an accountant, you might just, and they demand the title CFO, you might just give them the title CFO.
Sure.
But in any other organization outside of 10 million or above, they probably are not qualified to be a CFO.
Hmm.
And so, but what you've done is you've given them that title. So then as you grow, the second thing can happen. You can outgrow that person's skills and capabilities. Now, if you're hiring for growth mindset, which I think is very important from a cultural standpoint, you're hiring somebody that is hopefully going to grow as the organization grows. And you see it happen all the time. They grow with the organization and they become, the longstanding CFO till they're maybe over 100 million. And but if they don't, you do have to step back and ask yourself, and I do present that question in the book, which is knowing what I know now, would I rehire each person on my leadership team? And you just go through each one.
Yeah.
And you have to, as hard as that question is to answer, you have to answer that. And then you're faced with, if the answer is no, it's what do I do? Can I lean in? Are they going to grow? Can I develop them?
Yeah.
Can I get them some coaching? Can I get them some additional skills? Do they just lack certain capabilities? where they just so overtitle in the beginning that they're just absolutely not the next, person take us to the next level. Or, usually for me, if they fall out of being a cultural fit, that's usually the easy button for me is like, well,
Right.
this just isn't going to work.
Yeah.
Um, and not everyone's cut out for a scaling enterprise either. It's,
Right.
it's hair on fire, it's chaotic, it feels messy.
Yep. Yep.
It's like a organized chaos in some ways. And
Right.
if you've come from a very large organization where you have very large teams and it's very buttoned up and organized, this is going to feel extremely awkward to you.
Yeah.
And you probably will fail. And I've seen that happen a lot
Yeah.
because you're hiring for a skill set, but you're hiring from the wrong cultural fit. So they just have
Mm-hmm.
never been in a small environment where you gotta, I heard somebody write about it the other day. You have to play down. You have to roll
Mm-hmm.
up your sleeves and come
Yeah.
down and do things that you may feel like are beneath you. But that's what you do in an entrepreneurial enterprise when it's growing
Part of it.
and
Yeah.
scaling. Um, so yeah, I think it's, really, really important that you have that honest conversation with yourself.
Yeah.
And if you wouldn't rehire him and it's, and it, so long as it's outside of cultural fit, you really have to figure out what you're going to do because
Mm-hmm.
you probably are going to have to trade up that capability at some point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's interesting. There was a part in your people segment, the people chapter, that I just absolutely loved because one of the things that you say is you're talking about the scaling culture conundrum. And you say the solution lies not in a laissez-faire attitude of allowing your culture to be built by default, but in a deliberate and strategic approach to culture building, cultivating culture by
Mhm.
design. I love that. Um,
Yes.
Rather than by haphazard default is a crucial leadership focus during times of scaling. So to me, I mean, it seems like it's a leadership function. I mean, scaling and the people aspect of it is such a key component and a leadership function.
I have to give total credit to that expression came from my coach, actually. So my CEO coach,
Oh, cool.
I was complaining about a whole bunch of stuff in my company. And he looked at me and he said, Stephen, what kind of culture are you building? And I said, what do you
Mm,
mean? He goes, is it by design or by default? Because you're not going to like the latter,
yeah.
or you're just going to have to accept it. And I was just like, whoa, like,
Yeah.
what do you mean building culture?
Mm-hmm.
And that's when we got into this discussion about design the culture you want.
Yeah.
Um, and that was where it first came to my attention that you actually can consciously build your culture,
Mm-hmm.
right? You can attract talent based on your culture. You can design. It's not ping pong tables and,
Yeah. No.
bringing lunch in. That's just little tactical stuff.
Yeah.
It's truly consciously designing your culture to be what it is you want it to be. And
Yeah.
that was my first insight into, okay, well, I need to take this serious. And, we ended up actually, um, uh, our HR person, someone that was working for her, I actually hate that word. I shouldn't say HR, talent
Yeah.
people. But we designated her as, our culture curator. And it was like, you're going to curate the culture here. Like, you're going to perform the activities we're seeking to achieve.
Mm-hmm.
Again, you have to, from the top down, you have to act in accordance and
Yeah.
talk in accordance with the culture and what you want to see and who you want to be. But as far as carrying out a lot of the activities we wanted to do, we needed to have someone accountable internally that would help do that. Because
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times as a leader, you have all these things in your head you want to do, but you just can't get them out.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, can you help me curate this culture that I want to start building? And once we did that, that would just started, you could just see it immediately changing things.
Changing things.
But it's
Yeah. That's so
it
good.
it almost always comes down to hiring, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
when we developed um, our own version of the 9 box, which is, when you're
Yeah.
evaluating talent, but also
Yeah.
when you're hiring, right? You're hiring on
Yeah.
one axis of skills and expertise because you need certain capabilities. And
Yeah.
then on the other axis, we like to look at, how trainable or coachable or what's their growth mindset look like, how high do we think they can rise as talent?
Mm-hmm.
And then the third component, which is like, think of it as like a z-axis, if you will, but is totally left out of that, the traditional McKinsey 9 box, which is cultural fit, right? And for us, defining that cultural fit, and
Mm-hmm.
then literally, it wasn't like everything else was a scale of zero,
Yeah.
to five. That was a yes or a no. And if you
Mm.
even got one no from any of the other leaders that were in it, it was talked about, but it was typically that candidate was thrown out.
Right.
And you would see that exemplified pretty easily,
Mm-hmm.
in a not typically, or very seldom, I should say, in a one-on-one interview process, but
Mm-hmm.
normally like in a group setting,
Group setting. Yeah,
right?
sure.
So yeah, we'd have, how does this person act? And then the one I love is taking them to lunch or dinner, seeing how they act around other people, right?
Right.
Are they rude to the waitress or waiter?
Yeah.
How do they act? Do they, how is their, what do their manners feel like? How do they socialize? You can get a
Mm-hmm.
pretty good sense of someone. And there's different ways different companies can assess cultural fit, but you want to make sure what does success look like in being a cultural fit. And when you're hiring, if they don't fit that, as good as they might seem, you're going to
Mm.
have what we call the Terrell Owens syndrome, right? That you score lots of touchdowns, but you don't show up for practice. I
Yeah.
don't want that in my organization. That's just
Yeah,
a huge
exactly.
headache.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, totally, totally. Stephen, I'm hoping that what we're doing here in talking about these things are really putting a little bit of salt on the tongue of some of these CEOs and business leaders that are listening, because I want them to go buy the book, and I don't want to give them the whole thing. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, man, right
This is
on.
this is 272
And
pages of
it's
just
practical.
wisdom,
Yeah,
battle tested wisdom, and practical, applicable, and very actionable ways that you can translate this and implement this into your business.
yeah,
And what I, even though sequence does matter, what I do love about the book and the way I've heard people using it is you can flip around and go to certain sections that
sure.
maybe are more appealing to you at the time of where you're at in your business venture. And so,
Yeah,
um, I I hope, and what our hope is that we're able to provide something to entrepreneurs, that a guidebook, if you will, that I
yeah,
wished I would have had when I
yeah,
was first
sure.
starting my ventures, um, that is insightful and interesting and actionable. But at the end of the day, what we're looking for is just seeing people win. Because
Yeah.
I feel like when entrepreneurs win, we win,
Mm-hmm.
everyone wins in most sense. And we're very pro entrepreneur. So that's
I
really
love
the
that.
genesis of what we're trying to achieve with this book.
I love it. I love it so much. The book is really good. I mean, I have just been, I've devoured it, and it's so practical. It's applicable, and I love just the wisdom that's in it, from you, Stephen. And I really hope that folks will go out and get the book. But also, where can people get in touch with you? Because I know that you didn't retire. You are doing some other things. That's probably another whole podcast that I really, because when you said something about that, I started thinking about, oh,
Yeah.
I've taught, succession planning and succession and what happens at retirement, but we won't even go there. But how can people get in touch with you?
Yeah. No, I appreciate that, David. And I really, there's a couple ways. I am most active on LinkedIn. I just love the community. I love
Yeah.
how pro supportive everyone is on there.
Yeah.
It used to just be a place where you posted your resume. Now there's a
Yeah.
lot of engaging conversation there, and I absolutely love it. I'm participating in a lot of that conversation. I post almost every day on there. I'm trying to post some bits of wisdom or some practical advice.
Yeah.
Um, and then we do have our website, which is readyforscaling.com. And that gives you the tools that are in here. So you get
Yeah.
access to the tools. Once you have the book, you can access those tools. Those are the same tools we use with our clients, but we've adjusted them, modified them so that anybody can use them in a more friendly manner for their
Mm.
business. And then, I think typically uh, I'm pretty available through DM on LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm.
I check those pretty regularly. My email is pretty simple, Stephen at readyforscaling.com. But I would say in those two places, that's probably the best place to find us.
That's fantastic. Stephen, I just want to offer my deep gratitude. Thank you so much for taking the time, because this has been just a fascinating conversation for me. I know that the people who are listening, even if they're an emerging leader and maybe they're not starting a business, maybe they have had a dream to start a business, this can help them to be able to begin that process. And, I think as Henry David Thoreau said, advance confidently in the direction of your dream. And so this is a practical step to do that. When you read Stephen's book, you're going to be able to have the tools available to you to advance confidently in that direction of your dream. So, Stephen, thank you so
And David,
much.
I would absolutely. Oh, thank you, David. I'm just going to say, I'm sorry, I was cutting you off
No,
there. I
it's
was
great.
absolutely agreeing with. I would consider that a win. If somebody just read this and it sparked them to go do
Yes.
what they were hopeful of doing, starting a business, that would be a win. And you know what? Honestly, the questions that you have to ask yourself throughout the course of this book are fundamental to not just scaling a business, but actually starting a business as well. They're the same
Yeah.
things either you're going to have to think about now or later. You might as well
Right.
start thinking about it now and get ahead of it.
Wow.
But very much appreciate your time today. And thank you
Yes.
so much for having me on.
Oh,
I know we could just go on and on about lots of stories and conversations. So
oh
maybe we'll do
yeah.
this again another time.
I would absolutely love it, because there were so many places where I was actually taking a note because I wanted to come back to something, and so we'll have another conversation for sure, Stephen. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right, David. Thank you.